how much vitamin D should I take? Because we know that vitamin D is essential for immunity.
Yes,
that
indeed.
debate is finished.
Yeah.
We know it's essential for numerous other aspects of health.
Yeah.
Reducing chances of cancer, heart disease, probably type 1 diabetes, whole range of things that were covered. But how much should I take?
It's a bit like diabetes, actually. Someone has diabetes, they say, well, how much insulin should I take? And the answer is, you take enough for you as a person. The question is, what are we trying to do? Well, firstly, we're trying to prevent things like rickets. That requires a tiny, tiny amount of vitamin D. But the other thing is immunity, which requires a lot more vitamin D, quite honestly. Probably 1,000 times more. So, it's sometimes recommended we should take 400 units of vitamin D. Well, 400, it might prevent a child from developing rickets, but it's not going to do anything for immunity. For that would require at least 10 times as much. Well, we're trying to achieve a good blood level of vitamin D. And the blood level we require is between 100 and 150, actually about 150 nanomoles per litre. That's the objective. And if we look at the experience from COVID-19, we find out that people who've got over 100 nanograms per mil blood level, they don't come to any harm from COVID. When people take vitamin D, ideally they should have the blood level checked. It's like with diabetes, you get your blood tests. It's like with hypertension, you get your blood pressure measured. You're trying to achieve a target, and that's what we're trying to do. The amount of vitamin D an individual requires to achieve a target level of over 100 nanomoles per litre, that varies from person to person, quite honestly. But a good starting point is to say, well, what is a unit of vitamin D? Now, a unit of vitamin D is like a unit of insulin. They were both discovered at about the same time, 100 years ago. It was not possible to weigh them, to develop a mass measurement. It was only possible to have a biological measurement. And the biological measurement of vitamin D is that 1 unit is the daily requirement of a 10-gram mouse. So, when you say how much do we need, let's start off with the 10-gram mouse, 1 unit. Now, 1 unit of per 10 grams means that for a human with a body weight of 60 kilograms would require 6,000 units. We'll say, okay, if 6,000 units sounds about right for 60 kilograms, let's make a start on 3,000 units.
Which is very conservative.
It is conservative. The Standing Advisory Committee on Nutrition, SACN, was advising 400 units, but does admit that 4,000 units is perhaps the maximum that should be taken. What evidence for that? I don't know. Let's say we start on 3,000 units a day and then get your blood tested after 6 months, say. See what it is. And if it's not up to 100, you increase the dose. Like you do with insulin in diabetes, like you do with your treatment of hypertension. You judge the dose by the response it's had.
It's the titration, isn't it?
It is a titration.
Start off on 3,000.
Yeah.
For most people, I think it would be fair that we probably need, I'm sure I need about 8,000 a day personally for my body weight.
Well, I think that's right. So you could argue that someone weighs 120 kilograms for in excess of your weight might need 12,000 units a day. But again, it's a matter of measuring it. With body weight, by the way, the obese people do not have good blood levels of vitamin D. The vitamin D they produce in the skin tends to be soaked into the fat cells of the body, and it doesn't seem to come out again. So if you take an obese person and a non-obese person, expose them both to the same amount of sunlight or UV light, the obese person will produce perhaps only half the amount of vitamin D as measured in the blood than the non-obese person. So obese people do require more vitamin D. There's no easy measure of immunity. In fact, the blood level of vitamin D is a reasonable surrogate for measuring immunity. Because we know if people have high levels of vitamin D in the blood, good levels, they don't get infections like flu or COVID. And if they have low levels of vitamin D, they do get a lot of COVID, flu, and also a lot of other diseases as well. So immunity is best measured actually by vitamin D. Anyway, so we start off and we measure the response and we get there. And somehow it's going to be about 6,000 units a day. That seems reasonable, and it is perfectly safe.
So it's quite possible that you could give you and me 6,000 units of vitamin D a day each, and for genetic reasons, for microbiome reasons, for maybe 1,000 reasons we don't understand. I don't understand, certainly. We could end up with really quite different levels. There's a difference in response.
Indeed.
Now, what I find really curious here is that the vitamin D levels that are advised were basically worked out to prevent rickets back in the 1920s.
Yes, that's right.
And we've learned all these new functions and no one's bothered
no, indeed.
To update the requirement. It just seems utterly bizarre.
Well, it's now possible to measure the mass of vitamin D. And 1 unit weighs 25 billionths of a gram. Now, it's not very much. So what you find out, that when you get capsules of vitamin D, no matter what the dose of vitamin D is, they all look the same. And people can't get their minds around this for obvious reasons.
Actually tiny.
But 99% of the content of vitamin D capsule is olive oil. There's a tiny bit of vitamin D by mass and by volume, because it's an oil. So
why can't we test immunity by doing a differential? I'm sure you've ordered differential white cell counts about 10,000 times.
Yes, that's right. But that's
looking at the different types of white blood cell.
Yeah, that's right. It still doesn't quite work out.
Could there be a situation where you had the right number of white blood cells, the right number of lymphocytes, and the right number of neutrophils, but because you haven't got enough vitamin D, they could be physically present, but physiologically suboptimal in their physiological activity?
That's the problem. It's the function, not the structure. The T lymphocytes are critical, and the T lymphocytes are very dependent on vitamin D for their activation, but also very badly damaged in AIDS. And AIDS, of course, leads to infections, malignancies, because immunity is suppressed. And it gives a very good example, actually, of how immunity is suppressed. When it is suppressed, it leads to a lot of illnesses, strange infections, malignancies in AIDS, heart disease in AIDS, dementia in AIDS. A lot of things came out in AIDS which told us the importance of immunity, and in particular T-cell function. So I think that the problem at the moment, why there's been a lot of additional illness, and there is a lot of illness, no question about it. The ambulances aren't queuing up at the hospitals for no reason at all. It's because our immunity is damaged, and I think we need vitamin D in a big way at the present time. It's a public health imperative, really, but it's not happening.
And there's a lot of people watching this video feel a bit run down, a little bit tired. It's not spring yet. We're still at the end of winter. And, most people like me have had 1 or 2 viral infections over the course of the winter. Those viral infections are going to use up my vitamin D. I'd have much lower levels of vitamin D after a couple of viral infections, and it can be really quite low. And that can give rise to sort of physical symptoms. I mean, if you are very low on vitamin D, how might that make you feel? I mean, is the tiredness, the heaviness, are they features of it?
I'm not sure, quite honestly. I wouldn't say so. Might be true, but I'd really just go for the infections and the specific diseases rather than how you feel. People say, how can I recognise that I'm deficient in vitamin D? And the answer is, well, you have a blood test.
Chronic lack of vitamin D is an etiological factor in dementia and potentially other neurological diseases. Have you got any thoughts about the connection between vitamin D and neurological diseases?
Well, I think it's true to say the strongest one is multiple sclerosis. But that goes back to birth, because a baby born in the spring will have an increased risk of developing multiple sclerosis in adult life than a baby born in the autumn. Now, the autumn birth means the mother was pregnant during the summer and that she was there getting vitamin D to pass on to the baby in the uterus. And so the baby born in the autumn has a biological advantage in several different ways. Whereas the baby born in the spring, the mother was pregnant in advance in the last 3 or 4 months of pregnancy during the winter time with no vitamin D. Now, to my mind, no baby should be born in this country or anywhere deficient in vitamin D, because I think every mother, every woman who goes to the antenatal clinic should have a blood level of vitamin D check there and then.
But this isn't done.
It's not done, no. There's been the Sure Start project, which we had in Blackburn, which I was part of. And with that, we gave mothers, expectant mothers, vitamin D during pregnancy. But the Sure Start project has been cancelled. It's a central project. It's been cancelled, unfortunately, by government. So that doesn't happen now. But really, we should be checking the pregnant women, protecting them. There's a lot of evidence that vitamin D deficiency is related to eclampsia. What do they call it? PET now? Pre-eclamptic toxemia, pregnancy.
The high blood pressure, the proteinuria, the edema.
That's all, yeah, indeed. So a more successful pregnancy requires vitamin D and the baby after it.
Amazing, really. So we've got 3 things there: the health of the mother, perhaps optimising fetal development, and making sure the baby's vitamin D level is topped up when it's born. So as soon as a baby's born, it's going to be assaulted left, right and centre from the milieu of viruses and bacteria.
That's right. We hear about rickets in young children. That should not happen. It particularly occurs in the children of Black African and South Asian ethnicity, because their mothers, we know very well, are going to be deficient of vitamin D. People with dark skins do not produce enough vitamin D in the environment of the UK, where we're living closer to the North Pole than to the equator. At least these poor women should be checked. These women should be checked. The ethnic minority women should be targeted in particular, but they're not being, I'm afraid to say.
But even I'm pretty white, as you can see, and last summer I got quite a bit of sun at the allotment. So for about 5 or 6 months last summer I didn't take any vitamin D, and I actually managed to persuade my GP to check the levels. At the end of, it would be about September, the very end of summer, and I was pretty confident it would be topped up because I had a lot of sun exposure. And it was only about 75 nanomoles per litre. Still didn't have anywhere near optimum levels of vitamin D. I was very disappointed, and I've certainly gone back onto the supplements now.
It's a hormone, without any shadow of doubt. It's a hormone that's produced in the skin. We produce an oil in the skin called 7-dehydrocholesterol, and DHC, we call it 7-DHC, and the sun converts that into vitamin D, which enters our body, activated partially in the liver, and then activated fully in the cells. It is a hormone. The point is that it's not just humankind that produces vitamin D from 7-DHC. It starts off with plankton, and they produce 7-DHC, the oil, as a sunscreen. And it absorbs sunlight energy, it's converted into vitamin D, but the plankton have no use for vitamin D. Firstly, they don't have a skeleton, so they don't need it for bone. and they have a very primitive immune system. Plankton live close to the surface of the sea, so they are actually prone to UV damage. Yeah. But the 7-DHC absorbs the UV energy to a large extent, and vitamin D is the waste product. But plankton also tend to sink during the daytime and rise to the surface during the night time, which again protects them. Now, fish don't produce vitamin D either, because they have scales and they live deep in the sea. But fish eat plankton. It's the start of the food chain, and we eat fish.
Do fish need vitamin D for their physiology as well, then?
Yes, they will do. Yeah, certainly. So, the bony fish need it for the bones, but all fish will need it for the immunity. But land animals also produce vitamin D as a hormone in the skin. And we eat land animals, and we take vitamin D from meat. But our vitamin D supplements come from sheep, because sheep produce vitamin D in the skin. When the fleece is taken off in the summer, when it's too hot for them, the oil of the wool contains vitamin D and it's extracted. And when we have vitamin D supplements, it comes from the sheep's hormone. We call it a vitamin then, but we're not taking in a vitamin, we're taking a hormone from the sheep. It's like if we're short of thyroid, if we have an underactive thyroid, we take thyroxine tablets. Well, the thyroxine comes from animals. The animals produce the thyroxine, and we take the thyroxine from the thyroid extract from the animals. It's not as primitive as that these days, but nevertheless the principle is all the same.